Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you had a good week. Today we're talking side work when you're an automotive technician. Alright, so side work. Now this is something that each individual person's going to vary on a little bit. I do some side work. I know we all try to do it sometimes. It's really going to depend on you as a person, what you think, and if you think it's worth it. And it's really going to depend on what you think personally. But there's a lot of pros and cons, and we're going to weigh out some of those today. So, first, you have to be careful about your employer. All right, what I mean by that is some places, if you have a car that you're working on, and let's say even it's a family car, something like that, they're not going to be happy with that. If you're working on that in their facility, even if there's nothing else to do and you're not making any money, and it's a family member's car, they're going to be upset. So, some places don't care. Make sure you know beforehand how your employer feels about that, because you never want your employer to feel like you're threatening them or you're taking their business. Because at the end of the day, that is your primary job and you don't want to screw that up. So just kind of make sure you know what your employer's feel on that is before you go on taking side work that they may or may not find out about. And definitely before you would ever use the shop for something like that. Because most of the time that's not cool. Second is, if you're doing side work at home after work, there's a couple things you got to consider. One, for me, I go to work at about 6:45 in the morning, and I come home I leave at about 5 or 5:30. So I'm already putting in a long day. A lot of times if I do a side job after work, it's just that much harder, you guys, because I'm already dead from work. So you got to think if you're going to be even up for it, if you're going to, and some of the jobs are going to be small, but if you're going to do something that's fairly involved, you got to decide if that's something that you're up to doing at the end of the day. All right? Which brings me to my second point, which is every side job, for the most part, that I've ever done, and I've done a lot of side work, every single one almost, it seems like, if I plan for it to go and take a half an hour, it takes 3 or 4 hours. All right, and maybe not that long, but almost every single time, you guys, it's going to be harder and take way longer than you think it's going to be for a number of reasons. One, you probably don't have as nice a tools or the same variety of tools at home that you do at the shop or at your place of employment. You might bring a bag. I have a little bag I bring back and forth that I use when I need to bring tools home. But more than half the time you forget something, right? Oh, I needed my 14 millimeter ratcheting wrench. Oh man, it'd be nice to have this. Oh, my battery on my Milwaukee died. Oh, why didn't I think to grab a charger or a second battery? So all that stuff just goes to make it kind of more of a pain in the ass than it's worth. Sometimes, depends, not always. But so you have to plan on being tired, so we said that, and just make the job being harder than it has to be. The other thing is your shop, if you work in a respectable institution, your shop is going to have everything you need, whether that be adequate electrical supply, a lift, you're going to have all the parts washing stations. If you're working out of your garage at home, I mean, sometimes I didn't even have a stall in my garage that was open for me to work in, and I ended up working outside. Perfect example, a few weeks ago, I did rear brakes on a pickup truck, rear drum brakes. So I'm going, whatever, and I get everything apart, and I clean everything off, and drum brakes, it sucked. I forgot a couple of my drum brake tools. Not that drum brakes are that difficult, but if you're like me, they're just kind of a pain in the butt, and more often than not, especially if they're older and corroded, I just rather would not deal with it. Anyway, I'm doing these drum brakes, and so I told the guy that on the off chance that one of the drums was rubbed through, just to buy drums, because we might need them and I don't want to be without them. Well, so I start out by zipping the lug nuts off, and whoever did his tire rotate last cross-threaded one of the studs and snapped the stud. So I got to replace that, which wasn't that big of a deal, but again, at home, I kind of scrounged up some washers and made it work to get the thing installed. Second was, I opened my box of parts for the drum brake shoes, and apparently this truck had a split model year. So if you were on one side of the year, 2003, but if you were on the first end of 2003, you got this set of brake shoes. If you were on the other end of 2003, you got the other set. Guess who got the wrong set? That brings me to my other point and that was a poor example because obviously I ended up with the wrong stuff, kind of a fluke deal. But again, goes back to making everything harder. Everything gets harder because you're not just at your parts department. You got to go back to O'Reilly's or Napa or wherever you were getting your stuff and try again. But always make sure if you're going to do side work and agree to do it, you get the parts. Do not do side work for someone and put on parts that they provide for you. Because one, do they really know what's wrong? Do you have to diagnose it a little bit to actually figure out the problem? Two, are they going to buy a quality part? You don't want them to go to eBay and buy some Chinese knockoff part that's not going to fix their car anyway, and then you're going to do it twice. Three, you'll know, for the most part, that you got the correct part because this is your job and you're used to having to have someone look up the parts for you or even sometimes help them find the right part for the vehicle you're working on. So make sure that you order the parts if you're going to do side work. It's just going to save yourself a lot of time. And my last point I wanted to make is, yes, when you do side work, the money is great. I'll say, all right, this is what an average shop rate is. I'm going to cut that in half. All right, so then you end up still making quite a bit of money because you don't have, the same overhead that a shop would have. But at the end of the day, you have to really decide if it's worth it because, if you're like me, you work a long day. Do you really want to spend all your time working? There's been times where I really need the money, so it's like, yep, I'm going to do that. Yep, I can do that for you. But when I'm sitting okay, it's hard for me to want to do all the side work because, yeah, the money's great, but if you have no time to do anything with it and you're exhausted all the time, what's really the point? So those are just a few of my opinions on doing side work as a technician. Again, make sure you're being careful out there. And other than that, let me know what you think about side work. What do you think some of the pros and cons are? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's not worth it? Drop a comment below. Like, subscribe. See you next week.